Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. We should have never gone to Fish Lake National Forest. I'm Marcus Reed. I was 34 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The plan was simple enough. 3 weeks into October 2023, my wife Sarah and I decided to take our brand new Winnebago View for its maiden voyage. We'd been talking about getting an RV for years, saving every penny from my job at the telecommunications company and her freelance graphic design work. When we finally pulled the trigger on that gleaming 25-footer, we felt like we'd earned our slice of the American dream. Fish Lake National Forest in Utah seemed perfect, remote enough for stargazing, accessible enough for RV camping, and Sarah had found this Instagram-worthy spot called Pelican Overlook that promised sweeping views of the forest canopy. The photos showed endless aspen groves that would be turning gold by the time we arrived. What the photos didn't show was how the trees seemed to lean inward as you drove deeper into the forest, creating tunnels of shadow that the midday sun couldn't penetrate. We'd been married 8 years, together for 12. Sarah was the steady one between us. Where I tended to overthink and spiral into worst-case scenarios, she had this way of finding silver linings in rain clouds. She'd been the one to finally push us toward buying the RV after I'd hemmed and hawed about the expense for months. "Life's too short, Marcus," she'd said, running her hand along the RV's pristine white exterior at the dealership. "When are we going to stop planning for someday and start living today?" I loved that about her. How she could make the practical seem magical. The drive from Salt Lake City took us through increasingly sparse terrain. By the time we reached the forest boundaries, we hadn't seen another vehicle for over an hour. The GPS on my phone showed weak signal, but the RV's built-in navigation system seemed confident about our route to Pelican Overlook. "Look at this place," Sarah breathed, pressing her face to the passenger window. The aspens were indeed spectacular. Thousands of them stretching in every direction, their leaves a riot of gold and amber that shimmered like coins when the wind caught them. It's like driving through a fairy tale. But as we climbed higher into the mountains, following increasingly narrow dirt roads, something felt off. The fairy tale was beautiful, sure, but it was the kind from the original Brothers Grimm. Beautiful and dark and full of things that waited in the shadows. The first sign of trouble came around mile marker 47. Our RV's navigation system flickered, then died entirely. The screen went black for several seconds before rebooting with a soft chime. "That's weird," I muttered, tapping the display. "This thing's brand new. Maybe it's just the altitude," Sarah suggested, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She was already pulling out her phone to check our location. Her expression darkened. "Marcus, I'm not getting any signal, not even emergency calls." I pulled over and checked my own phone. Dead zone. Complete cellular silence in an age where you could get bars on top of Mount Everest if you had the right plan. "It's fine," I said, more to convince myself than her. "We'll just follow the road. How hard can it be to find a campground?" Famous last words. The road began to branch and fork in ways that defied the paper map we'd bought at the last gas station. What should have been a straightforward route to Pelican Overlook became a maze of unmarked paths winding between the trees. Some looked recently used, others were barely more than deer trails that happened to be wide enough for vehicles. We chose wrong. Again and again. By late afternoon, we were thoroughly lost. The aspens had given way to darker pines that blocked out most of the sky, leaving us in premature twilight. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and our RV's thermometer was showing numbers that made me nervous about spending the night at this altitude. That's when we found the clearing. It appeared suddenly around a bend. A perfect circle of open space maybe 50 yards across, ringed by towering pines. In the center sat a weathered picnic table and a fire pit that looked like it had been used recently. Fresh ashes, no vegetation growing through the ring of stones. "This'll work," I said, relief flooding my voice. "We'll spend the night here and figure out our bearings in the morning." Sarah nodded, but I noticed she was scanning the tree line with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I stopped the engine and listened. Wind in the pines, a distant bird call. And underneath it all, something else. Something that sounded almost like humming, Sarah whispered. Someone's humming. I strained my ears but couldn't make it out clearly. Probably just the wind in the trees, I said. Plays tricks on you in places like this. But even as I said it, I wasn't convinced. Setting up the RV was routine enough. Leveling jacks, electrical hookup to our internal battery system, checking the propane connections. The familiar tasks helped calm my nerves. This was just camping. This was what we'd bought the RV for. Sarah busied herself inside, arranging our supplies and starting dinner preparations. Through the windows, I could see her moving around our mobile home, and the sight was comforting. Normal. We were just a married couple on a camping trip in a beautiful place. The sun set fast in the mountains. One moment we had dappled light filtering through the trees. The next, we were surrounded by complete darkness that seemed to press against our windows like black water. Jesus, I muttered, switching on the RV's exterior lights. You forget how dark it gets out here. The LED spots illuminated maybe 20 feet in each direction, creating a small island of visibility in an ocean of night. Beyond that circle, the darkness was absolute. No moon, no stars visible through the canopy. No distant glow of civilization. Sarah called me in for dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce, one of our camping standbys. We ate by the light of our interior LED strips, the RV feeling cozy and secure around us. This is nice, she said, twirling pasta on her fork. Remote camping, just us and nature. Once we figure out where we are, yeah. I was still bothered by the navigation failure, the dead cell zone. In my line of work, I'd seen how much of modern life depended on staying connected. Being cut off like this felt unnatural. Maybe that's the point, Sarah said. When's the last time we went a whole day without checking email or social media? She had a point. We'd been talking about digital detoxing for months. Maybe being forced off the grid for a night wasn't such a bad thing. After dinner, we settled in to watch a movie on Sarah's laptop. We'd made it maybe 20 minutes into an old romantic comedy when the laptop screen flickered and went black. Battery? I asked. Sarah checked the power indicator. It's plugged in and showing full charge. She tried to restart it, but nothing happened. Dead. Weird. I grabbed my own laptop from the overhead compartment. Same thing. Completely unresponsive despite showing a full charge earlier. Both laptops can't just die at the same time, Sarah said. There was an edge to her voice now. I tried our phones again. Still no signal, but more troubling, they were both showing rapidly draining batteries despite being plugged into the RV's USB ports all day. There must be some kind of electromagnetic interference, I said, falling back on my technical background. Maybe we're near a radio tower or something? But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. EWEM interference strong enough to kill electronics would be coming from something powerful, and there was nothing like that in the middle of a national forest. The humming started again around 10 o'clock. This time, there was no mistaking it. A low, melodic sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It rose and fell in patterns that were almost familiar, like a song you've heard before but can't quite remember. Sarah gripped my arm. Tell me you hear that. I hear it. We sat in silence, listening. The humming would fade away for a few minutes, then return slightly louder, slightly different. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes like many voices harmonizing. Should we go outside? Sarah whispered. Every instinct I had screamed no. Let's just wait. If someone needs help, they'll come to us. But no one came. The humming continued until nearly midnight, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Neither of us slept well that night. Every small sound outside, branches creaking, pine cones falling, the settling of the RV itself, made us both tense up. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps circling the RV, but when I peered out through the blinds, I saw nothing but darkness. Morning brought relief and new problems in equal measure. The relief was psychological. Daylight made the previous night's strangeness feel manageable, explicable. The humming could have been wind patterns through the trees. The electronics could have been damaged by altitude or temperature changes. Fear had made us paranoid. The problems were practical. Our RV's engine wouldn't start. I tried everything. Checking connections, testing the battery, examining fuses. The engine would turn over but wouldn't catch, like it wasn't getting fuel or spark. The diagnostic system that should have told me what was wrong showed only error codes. "How far are we from the main road?" Sarah asked, studying our paper map. I traced our route with my finger, trying to remember which turns we'd made. "Maybe 5 miles? 8 at the most. That's walkable." I looked at the trees surrounding us, remembering the maze of unmarked paths that had led us here. If we can find the right path, and if we can find it again to come back for the RV. So, what do we do? Before I could answer, we heard it. A vehicle engine, growing closer. "Thank God," Sarah breathed. The sound came from the east, back the way we'd come. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of white moving between the pines. A few minutes later, a battered pickup truck emerged into our clearing. The driver was an older man, maybe 60, with a weathered face and clothes that suggested he spent more time outdoors than in. He climbed out of his truck slowly, studying our RV with an expression I couldn't read. "You folks having trouble?" he called. "Engine won't start," I replied, walking over to meet him. "I'm Marcus. This is my wife, Sarah. Name's Dale." He didn't offer to shake hands. "You picked an interesting spot to camp." There was something in the way he said, "interesting," that made me uncomfortable. "Is this private property? We can move if—" "No, it's public land." Dale looked around the clearing, his eyes lingering on the tree line. "It's just that most folks who know this area, they don't camp here." "Why not?" Dale was quiet for a long moment. "You hear anything last night?" Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Some wind in the trees," I said carefully. "Uh-huh." Dale walked over to our RV and popped the hood without asking permission. He poked around the engine for a few minutes, then stepped back. "Try starting it now." I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life immediately. "How did you—" "Loose connection," Dale said, closing the hood. "Happens sometimes at altitude." But I'd checked every connection that morning. I was sure of it. Dale got back in his truck and started to leave, then rolled down his window. "You folks might want to find a different place to spend tonight. There's a proper campground about 15 miles south of here. Follow the main road. Can't miss it." "Why?" Sarah asked. "What's wrong with this spot?" Dale looked at her for a long moment. "Some places aren't meant for people," he said finally, "especially not at night." With that, he drove away, leaving us standing in the clearing with more questions than answers. "He was trying to scare us," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Or warn us," Sarah replied. We spent the morning exploring the immediate area, trying to get our bearings and find the route back to the main road. The forest was beautiful in daylight, the golden aspens giving way to deep green pines, wildflowers carpeting small meadows, crystal-clear streams that had to be fed by mountain springs. But there were odd things, too. Trees that had been carved with symbols. Not initials or hearts, but geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Animal bones arranged in small circles that couldn't have been natural. And everywhere, that sense of being watched. Around noon, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been photographing the aspens for her portfolio when she noticed something in one of her shots. A structure barely visible through the trees about a quarter-mile to the north. "Marcus, look at this." She showed me the camera's LCD screen. It looked like a building. A cabin or lodge, mostly hidden by the forest but definitely man-made. "Maybe there's someone there who can help us get our bearings," I suggested. The hike to the structure took us through increasingly dense woods. The trees grew closer together, blocking more and more light, until we were walking in perpetual twilight. The air grew colder and carried strange scents. Not just pine and earth, but something else. Something organic and unpleasant that reminded me of rotting meat. The building, when we finally reached it, was not what we'd expected. It was old, very old. The logs were weathered gray and covered in moss, the roof partially collapsed. But it wasn't abandoned. Someone had been maintaining it. The windows were intact, the door solid, and there was a neat stack of firewood beside the entrance. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone home?" No response. Sarah tried the door. It was unlocked. The interior was a single large room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden furniture, and walls covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned and taped and nailed to every available surface. All of the photographs showed the same thing: our clearing. Pictures taken from different angles, in different seasons, at different times of day and night. Some looked recent, others were faded and yellowed with age. In the older ones, I could see people, campers, hikers, families, setting up tents and RVs in our clearing. But there was something wrong with the people in the photos. In every single picture, they were looking toward the camera. Not posing, not aware they were being photographed, but turned toward whoever was taking the picture with expressions of confusion or fear. "Jesus Christ," Sarah whispered. "How long has someone been watching that place?" I was studying one of the older photos, a black and white image that looked like it could be from the 1950s. A family of 4 was setting up camp near the fire pit. A father, mother, and 2 young children. All 4 were looking directly at the camera with wide, frightened eyes. In the bottom right corner, someone had written a date in fading ink, July 15th, 1952. "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But Sarah had found something else. On a wooden table in the center of the room sat a journal, open to a recent entry. The handwriting was careful, precise. October 19th, 2023. New arrivals in the clearing. Couple with RV, Utah plates. Male approx, 30 or 35. Female similar age. They heard the calling last night but did not answer. Will monitor. Today's date. We'd arrived yesterday. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the journal. Page after page of similar entries going back decades. Different handwriting styles, different pens, but the same clinical observations of people camping in our clearing. June 3rd, 1997, family of 5 in tent. Children ages 6 to 12 approximately. The calling was strong tonight. Mother tried to leave after second night, but father convinced her to stay. Will monitor. August 26th, 1987. 2 male hikers, early 20s. They found the markers during day exploration but did not understand meaning. One sleepwalked to the circle on third night. Other tried to wake him but could not. Will monitor. September 14th, 1976. Elderly couple in travel trailer. Both experienced calling on first night. Man investigated source on second night. Did not return to trailer. Woman found at circle at dawn, speaking in unknown language. Will monitor. The entries went on and on, stretching back to the 1940s. Different people, different circumstances, but always the same location. Always the same watcher. Always the same ominous final phrase. Will monitor. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely audible. "We have to go. Now." But she was staring at the wall of photographs with a look of horrified fascination. "Marcus, look at this one." She was pointing to a color photo that looked recent. It showed our RV parked in the exact spot we'd chosen, with 2 figures sitting at the picnic table. Us. Last night, eating dinner. The photo had been taken from somewhere in the trees, close enough to show details of our faces, our clothes, our food, close enough to see that we were completely unaware of being watched. Someone had been out there in the darkness, photographing us. "We're getting the RV and we're leaving," I said. "Right now." The hike back to the clearing felt like it took forever. Every shadow between the trees could be hiding someone. Every sound could be footsteps. By the time we reached our RV, we were both running. I started the engine while Sarah threw our belongings into cabinets and secured everything for travel. The RV started immediately, another small mercy, and I began the careful process of backing out of the clearing. That's when we saw him. A figure at the edge of the trees, maybe 30 yards away. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching us. "Drive," Sarah whispered. "Just drive." I accelerated as much as I dared on the narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the RV's sides. In the rearview mirror, I could see the figure still standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless as a scarecrow. The maze of forest roads that had confused us the day before seemed even more complex now. Every path looked the same. Every fork in the road led to 3 more choices. My hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and sweat was running down my back despite the cold air. "There," Sarah said, pointing ahead. "I think that's the road we came in on." She was right. After an hour of wrong turns and dead ends, we finally found the main forest road. Paved asphalt had never felt so welcoming under our tires, but we weren't safe yet. As we climbed toward the forest boundary, our RV began making sounds it had never made before. A grinding noise from the engine, electrical systems flickering on and off, the whole vehicle shuddering like it was fighting against some invisible force. "Come on," I muttered, nursing the accelerator. "Just get us out of here." The RV limped along for another few miles, systems failing one by one. First, the GPS went dark again. Then, the radio filled with static. The headlights dimmed to almost nothing despite being only hours old. We were maybe 2 miles from the forest boundary when the engine died completely. This time, no amount of checking connections or testing systems would bring it back to life. We were stranded on a mountain road as darkness began to fall again. "We walk," I said. "Leave everything and walk. Marcus, it's got to be 15 miles to the nearest town." Then we walk 15 miles. We grabbed water, flashlights, and warm clothes. As we prepared to leave the RV, Sarah looked back at our mobile home with an expression of real grief. We'd owned it for less than a month, and now we were abandoning it in the middle of nowhere. "We'll come back for it," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The walk down the mountain road was a nightmare. Our flashlights worked for maybe 10 minutes before their batteries died, leaving us stumbling along in near-complete darkness. The temperature dropped steadily, and I could see our breath in the thin mountain air. Behind us, I kept hearing sounds. Footsteps matching our pace, branches breaking, the soft whisper of someone moving through the trees parallel to the road. But every time I stopped to listen, the sounds stopped too. "Don't look back," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm. "Whatever you do, don't look back." I don't know what made her say that, but some instinct told me she was right. Some primitive part of my brain was screaming that turning around would be the worst mistake I could make. So we walked, and tried not to think about what might be following us in the darkness. The humming started again around midnight. This time it was closer, much closer. Sometimes it seemed to come from the trees on our left, sometimes from our right. Occasionally it sounded like it was coming from the road ahead of us, blocking our path. "Don't stop," I told Sarah. "Whatever happens, don't stop walking." But the humming was getting louder, more insistent, and underneath it, I could hear something else. Voices, calling our names. "Marcus." The voice was sweet, melodious, barely audible above the humming. "Sarah." It sounded like children singing a lullaby. "Marcus? Sarah? Come home." Sarah stumbled, and for a moment I thought she was going to leave the road and walk toward the voices. Her face had a dreamy, distant expression that terrified me. "Sarah." I grabbed her shoulders and shook her. "Stay with me." She blinked, focused on my face, and the dreamy look faded. "I'm okay. I'm okay." But I could see she wasn't okay. None of this was okay. The voices continued calling our names, but we kept walking, one foot in front of the other, down the mountain, toward civilization, toward help. Dawn was breaking when we finally saw lights in the distance. A gas station and a diner, looking like the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. Sarah started crying when she saw them, and I realized I was crying too. The people at the diner were kind. They let us use their phone to call for help, gave us coffee and breakfast, and didn't ask too many questions about why we were walking down a mountain road in the middle of the night without a vehicle. The tow truck driver who went to retrieve our RV came back 3 hours later, confused and empty-handed. Couldn't find it, he said. Drove up and down that road twice. You sure that's where you left it? I rode back with him to double-check. We found the spot where the RV had died. I was sure of it, because I'd memorized the mile marker and a distinctive rock formation. But there was nothing there. No RV, no tire tracks, no sign that we'd ever been there at all. It was like our Winnebago had simply vanished. The insurance investigation took months and went nowhere. The company eventually paid out our claim, citing the RV as stolen, but I knew better. It wasn't stolen. It was taken by whatever lived in that forest. Whatever watched and waited and collected things that wandered too far from the safe, illuminated world. Sarah and I moved to Phoenix 6 months later. We told ourselves it was for better job opportunities, but really it was because we needed to be somewhere with lots of people and lights and noise. Somewhere that felt safe. We don't talk about what happened in Fish Lake National Forest. Not to each other, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night when the desert wind is howling around our house, I hear something underneath it. A faint humming. Voices calling our names. And sometimes I catch Sarah staring out our bedroom window with that same dreamy expression she'd had on the mountain road. "Come home," the voices whisper. "Come home." I've started checking the locks on our doors twice each night. I've installed motion sensors and security cameras around our property. I tell myself it's just normal home security, but I know what I'm really watching for. Because I don't think we really escaped that forest. I think part of it followed us home, and I think, sooner or later, it's going to want the rest of us back. Last week, Sarah mentioned she'd been thinking about getting another RV. For weekend trips, she said casually over dinner. Nothing fancy, just something to get us out of the city for a while. The way she said it made my blood freeze. Her voice had that same dreamy quality it had gotten on the mountain road. "I found this beautiful spot online," she continued, showing me her phone. "Fish Lake National Forest in Utah. There's this place called Pelican Overlook that looks amazing." I looked at the screen. It was a photo of our clearing. The exact same clearing, down to the weathered picnic table and the fire pit with its ring of stones. "We're not going camping," I told her. She looked hurt, confused. "Why not? We loved camping." "We're not going camping," I repeated. But as I said it, I could hear them again. Faint, but unmistakable. The voices in the wind, calling our names, calling us home. And I realized with growing horror that saying no might not be enough. Because whatever was in that forest had already started the process of bringing us back. The humming is getting louder every night. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Flathead National Forest. I'm Sarah Rodriguez, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The RV was Marcus's idea. He'd been talking about it for months after his divorce finalized. Something about getting back to nature, disconnecting from the digital world that had consumed his marriage. I understood the appeal. My own life felt suffocated by routine. Wake up, teach 5th grade, grade papers, sleep, repeat. When he suggested we take his brand new Winnebago up to Montana for a week, I jumped at the chance. "It'll be perfect," Marcus said, running his hand along the pristine white exterior. 36 feet of luxury. Full kitchen, shower, satellite TV if we want it, but we won't need it where we're going. The RV was impressive, I'll give him that. Marcus had spent his settlement money well. Or foolishly, depending on how you looked at it. Leather seating, granite countertops, a master bedroom that actually felt spacious. It was like a 5-star hotel on wheels. We'd been friends since college, though there had always been something more simmering beneath the surface. His recent divorce had made things complicated in ways neither of us wanted to acknowledge. This trip felt like a test. Of our friendship. Of what we might become. Of whether we could handle being alone together in the wilderness for 7 days. The drive to Flathead took us through increasingly remote territory. Cities gave way to towns. Towns to settlements. Settlements to nothing but endless forest and mountain peaks that scraped the belly of gray clouds. Marcus drove with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many outdoor adventure shows. while I navigated using a combination of GPS and an old paper map he'd insisted on bringing. Technology fails, he'd said. Paper doesn't. He wasn't wrong, as it turned out. We reached our intended campsite, a remote spot Marcus had found on some RV forum, just as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks. The location was everything he'd promised, a clearing beside a small lake, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to whisper secrets in the evening breeze. No other campers in sight, no cell service, no sounds except the gentle lapping of water and the occasional call of a loon. "This is perfect," I said, stepping out onto the pine needle carpet. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of evergreen and something else, something deeper and more primal that made my skin prickle in a way I couldn't explain. Marcus was already setting up, leveling the RV and connecting the utilities with practiced efficiency. He'd done his homework, watched countless YouTube videos on RV camping. Everything had a place and a purpose in his methodical world. That first night was magical. We grilled steaks on the outdoor propane grill, drank wine as the stars emerged in a canopy more brilliant than anything visible from the city. The lake reflected the moonlight like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in months, I felt truly relaxed. "Thank you for this," I told Marcus as we sat in folding chairs beside the water. I needed to get away from everything. He smiled, the firelight dancing across his face. We both did. It was then that we heard it, a sound that made us both go quiet. It came from across the lake, echoing off the mountains. A long, mournful cry that seemed almost human, but not quite. It rose and fell like a lament, haunting and beautiful and deeply unsettling. "Loon," Marcus suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," I said, though I'd never heard a loon make a sound quite like that. The cry came again, closer this time, and I felt goosebumps rise along my arms. There was something in that sound that spoke to a primal part of my brain, the ancient part that knew when to be afraid. "Let's head inside," Marcus said, standing abruptly. "Early morning tomorrow. I want to explore some of those hiking trails." We retreated to the RV, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay in the narrow guest bed, listening to the forest sounds outside. The rustle of wind through pines, the distant splash of something large moving through the lake, and underneath it all, a subtle vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. The second day dawned gray and overcast, the mountains shrouded in mist that clung to the peaks like smoke. Marcus was already up, making coffee in the RV's compact kitchen. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. "Sleep okay?" he asked, not meeting my gaze. "Fine," I lied. We hiked that morning, following a trail that led up into the foothills. The path was well marked initially, but as we climbed higher, the blazes became sporadic, then disappeared entirely. The forest grew darker, the canopy so thick that even the gray daylight barely penetrated. "Are we lost?" I asked after we'd been walking for over an hour without seeing any trail markers. Marcus consulted his GPS, frowning at the display. "That's weird. It says we're not on any trail at all, but we've been following the path this whole time." I looked back the way we'd come. The trail was still there, clear as day, winding down through the trees toward where our RV should be. But when I looked ahead, the path seemed to fade into nothing, swallowed by underbrush and fallen logs. "Let's turn back," I said. "I don't like this." But when we tried to retrace our steps, the trail behind us had changed. What had been a clear path now branched in 3 directions, each looking equally legitimate and equally wrong. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, turning in a slow circle. "We just came from there." I know we did. It took us 4 hours to find our way back to the RV, following what might have been the same trail or might have been something else entirely. By the time we stumbled back into the clearing, the sun was setting, and we were both exhausted and shaken. "GPS malfunction," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. "The satellite coverage is probably spotty up here." That night, the crying came again. Not across the lake this time, but from the forest directly behind our campsite. It was closer, more distinct, and definitely not a loon. It sounded like a child, lost and afraid, calling for help in a voice that cracked with desperation. I found myself at the RV's rear window, peering out into the darkness between the trees. "Marcus," I whispered, "do you hear that?" He joined me at the window, his face pale in the moonlight. Jesus. Should we go look? The cry came again, so close it seemed to be just beyond the edge of our campsite. A child's voice, definitely calling, "Help me, please, I'm lost." Marcus was already reaching for a flashlight, but I grabbed his arm. "No, something's wrong about this. A child alone in the wilderness? Out here? It doesn't make sense. But what if someone's really in trouble?" The voice called again, and this time I heard something that made my blood freeze. The words were right, the tone was desperate and frightened, but underneath it all was something else, a quality that wasn't quite human, like an echo that arrived before the original sound. "That's not a child," I whispered. Marcus stared at me, then back out the window. "What are you talking about? Of course it's a child." But as we listened, the voice began to change. Subtle at first, then more obvious. The pitch shifted, becoming deeper, older. The words remained the same. "Help me, please, I'm lost." But the voice that spoke them was no longer that of a frightened child. Marcus stepped back from the window, his face white. "What the hell is that?" The voice called again, and now it was clearly an adult man, still crying for help but with an inflection that seemed almost mocking. Then it changed again. A woman's voice, then an elderly person's, then back to a child's, cycling through different speakers like some twisted radio broadcast. "Help me, please, I'm lost." Each voice was distinct, perfect in its imitation of human distress, but the words never changed. And underneath them all was that quality of wrongness, as if something that had never been human was trying its best to approximate our sounds. We spent the rest of the night huddled inside the RV, all the lights on, while the voices, continued to call from the forest. Sometimes it sounded like it was right outside our door. Other times it seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if a crowd of lost souls was surrounding us. Morning brought silence and a heavy fog that reduced visibility to maybe 20 feet. Marcus wanted to leave immediately, but when he tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, making a grinding sound that echoed off the invisible mountains. "Battery's fine," he said, checking under the hood. "Fuel pump's working. I don't understand it." I was more concerned with what I could see, or couldn't see, in the fog. Shapes moved at the edge of visibility, tall and thin and wrong somehow, like trees that had learned to walk. When I focused on them directly, they became ordinary pines and firs, but in my peripheral vision, they definitely moved. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we need to get out of here. Now." "I'm trying," he snapped, frustration and fear making his voice sharp. "The engine won't turn over. It's like something's wrong with the fuel system." He spent the morning tinkering with the engine while I kept watch from inside the RV. The fog never lifted, if anything growing thicker as the day progressed. And in that gray void, I began to see things that couldn't possibly be there. A child stood at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, facing our RV. When I called Marcus to look, he saw nothing, but the child remained, a small figure in what looked like old-fashioned clothing, too distant and obscured to make out clearly but undeniably present. "There's nothing there, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice tight with worry. "It's just the fog playing tricks on your eyes." But even as he spoke, I could see the child raise one arm, pointing directly at us. The fog finally began to clear late in the afternoon, retreating slowly like a living thing reluctant to give up its hold on the forest. As visibility improved, I realized with growing horror that our campsite had changed. The lake was still there, but it seemed smaller somehow, darker. The shoreline had shifted, and what had been a gentle slope down to the water was now a steep bank that dropped off abruptly into black depths. The forest, too, was different. The trees were taller, more gnarled, their branches reaching toward each other overhead like clawed fingers. And between their trunks, I could see signs of human presence that hadn't been there before. Structures. crude shelters made from branches and animal hides, the remains of old campfires, their ashes long cold, and scattered throughout the forest floor, glints of metal and fabric that might once have been camping equipment. "Marcus," I called softly, "come look at this." He emerged from under the RV's hood, grease stains on his hands and shirt. When he saw what I was pointing at, his face went pale. "Those weren't there yesterday," he said. "No," I agreed. "They weren't." That's when we heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps moving through the forest toward our campsite. Not trying to be stealthy, but not hurried either. The steady pace of something that knew exactly where it was going and was in no rush to get there. We both froze, listening. The footsteps came from the north, where the forest was thickest. Snap of twigs, rustle of underbrush, the soft thud of feet on pine needles, getting closer. Marcus grabbed a tire iron from his toolbox. I picked up a heavy flashlight from inside the RV. We stood together at the edge of our campsite, facing the forest, waiting for whatever was coming to show itself. The footsteps stopped just inside the tree line. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then, from the shadows between the trunks, came a voice I recognized. "Help me! Please! I'm lost!" It was the child's voice from the night before, but now I could see its source. A figure stood just barely visible in the gloom. Tall as an adult, but with proportions that seemed wrong. Too thin and angular. It wore what looked like rags, dark fabric hanging in tatters from a frame that seemed to shift and blur when I tried to focus on it. "Help me," it called again, and now I could see that its mouth didn't move in sync with the words. The voice came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, as if the thing was a puppet being operated by something hidden inside. Marcus raised the tire iron. "Stay back," he shouted. "We're armed." The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, like an owl turning to examine prey. Then it smiled, and I saw that it had too many teeth, row upon row of them gleaming white in the forest shadows. "Please," it said in the child's voice, taking a step forward. "I'm lost." That's when I noticed the others. They emerged from the forest around us, not walking, but flowing like liquid shadow between the trees. Dozens of them, all wrong in different ways. Some too tall, some too short, all moving with that same disturbing fluidity. They formed a rough circle around our campsite just inside the tree line, watching us with eyes that reflected the dying daylight like mirrors. "The RV," Marcus said quietly. "Get to the RV." We backed toward the vehicle, weapons raised, while the things in the forest watched. They made no move to follow, content to observe from the shadows. But as we reached the RV's door, I heard something that made my blood freeze. One of them was speaking in my mother's voice. "Sarah, honey," it said with perfect inflection, the same tone my mother used when she was worried about me. "Why don't you come here? You look tired." Another took up the call in my father's voice. "Princess, come give your dad a hug." Then Marcus's ex-wife's voice. "Marcus, you bastard, get over here right now." More voices joined in. A cacophony of familiar sounds speaking words that were almost right but not quite. Family members, friends, co-workers, all calling to us with increasing urgency. But underneath the perfect mimicry was that same wrongness, that hollow quality that marked them as imitations. We stumbled into the RV and locked the door, though I doubted it would stop them if they really wanted to get in. Outside, the voices continued, rising and falling like a twisted chorus. Sometimes they argued with each other in the voices of people we knew, having conversations that made no sense, repeating phrases and inflections like broken records. "What are they?" Marcus asked, his face pressed against the window. I didn't have an answer. The things outside looked almost human in the gathering darkness, but their movements were too fluid, their proportions too wrong, and the way they spoke, not just the voice mimicry, but the timing, the repetition, the hollow echo underneath, suggested something that had learned to imitate human behavior without truly understanding it. As night fell, they began to move closer. At first, they maintained their distance, staying just inside the forest. But gradually, they crept forward, testing the boundaries of our campsite. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, always staying just outside the reach of our RV's exterior lights. "The engine," Marcus said suddenly. "I have to try the engine again." "Don't go out there. We can't stay here forever. Whatever's wrong with the RV, maybe I can fix it." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. If we couldn't get the engine started, we'd be trapped here with those things. And something told me that our luck wouldn't hold forever. Marcus gathered his tools and a powerful LED lantern. "I'm going to make a run for the engine compartment. Keep the door unlocked, but be ready to let me back in fast." He opened the door and sprinted to the front of the RV. Immediately, the things in the forest began to stir, moving restlessly at the edge of the light. The voices rose in volume, calling to us with increasing desperation. "Marcus, please," his ex-wife's voice pleaded. "I'm sorry about everything. Come back to me." "Sarah, sweetie," my mother's voice added. "These bad people are trying to hurt you. Come to Mommy." But Marcus ignored them, working frantically under the hood. I could hear him muttering to himself, testing connections, checking hoses. The things in the forest pressed closer, their forms becoming clearer in the lantern light. They looked like people who had been stretched and twisted, familiar but wrong in fundamental ways. "Got it!" Marcus shouted suddenly, and the engine roared to life. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They recoiled as if burned, flowing back into the deeper forest. Their voices became shrieks of anger and frustration, no longer attempting to mimic human speech but revealing something much more primal underneath. Marcus slammed the hood and ran back to the RV. "Go! Go! Go!" he yelled, jumping into the driver's seat. We lurched forward, tires spinning on the pine needles and soft earth. Through the rear window, I could see the things pursuing us, no longer trying to maintain their human facades. They ran on all fours like animals, their two long limbs carrying them across the ground with horrifying speed. The forest blurred past as we raced down what I hoped was the same road we'd taken to reach the campsite. But in the darkness, every tree looked the same. Every turn could be leading us deeper into the wilderness or back toward civilization. "The GPS," I said, grabbing the device from the dashboard. "Where are we?" The screen showed nothing but static. No roads, no landmarks, just a blank gray field with our position marker blinking alone in the void. "Paper map," Marcus said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Check the paper map." I unfolded the topographical map he'd brought, using my phone's flashlight to read it. But when I found our supposed location, there was nothing there. No lake, no campground, no road. According to the map, we were in the middle of unbroken wilderness. "That's impossible," I said. "We drove here on a road. There was definitely a road. Behind us, something heavy hit the back of the RV with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. Through the rear camera monitor, I could see one of the creatures clinging to our bumper, its two long arms wrapped around the spare tire carrier. Its face was pressed against the camera, and for a moment I saw it clearly. Human features stretched and distorted, eyes that reflected our taillights like those of a nocturnal animal. Marcus swerved violently, trying to shake it loose. The creature held on, its mouth opening to reveal those rows of teeth. Then more of them appeared on either side of the RV, keeping pace with us despite our speed. "They're everywhere!" I screamed. The road, if it had ever been a real road, was becoming rougher, forcing Marcus to slow down. The creatures pressed their advantage, more of them leaping onto the RV. I could hear their claws scraping against the metal roof, their voices raised in that horrible mimicry. "Sarah, help us," they called in the voices of my students. "We're scared. We're lost." The windshield cracked as something landed on the hood. Through the spiderweb of broken glass, I could see a figure that might once have been human. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, its head twisted around backwards so it could stare at us with those reflective eyes. That's when Marcus hit the brakes. The sudden stop sent the creatures flying, their inhuman shrieks filling the night air. But more were coming, emerging from the forest on all sides. We were surrounded, the RV's lights creating a small island of visibility in an ocean of nightmare. "The rifles," Marcus said grimly. "I brought hunting rifles. They're in the storage compartment." He'd mentioned that on the first day, 2 30-06 rifles and plenty of ammunition, in case we saw any deer. I thought it was overkill for a camping trip, but now I was grateful for his preparedness. We worked quickly, loading the rifles while the creatures circled the RV like sharks. They seemed to sense the change in our tactics, becoming more cautious, staying just outside the range of our lights. "On 3, Marcus said, positioning himself at the door. "I'll go right, you go left. Aim for center mass." "These aren't deer, Marcus. What if bullets don't stop them?" "Then we're going to find out together." We burst through the door, rifles raised. The creatures scattered at first, then regrouped when they realized we weren't running. The closest one, a tall, thin thing with arms that hung nearly to the ground, let out a shriek and charged. Marcus's rifle boomed, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the forest. The creature spun and fell, black blood spreading across the pine needles. But even as it fell, it was changing, its form flowing like liquid shadow. More were coming. I fired at one that leaped from a nearby tree, saw it tumble to the ground, but it was already moving again before it hit, wounded but far from dead. "Back to the RV," Marcus shouted. We retreated, slamming and locking the door behind us. Outside, the creatures had regrouped, their voices rising in anger. But something had changed. They were more cautious now, keeping their distance from the windows. "We hurt them," I said, checking my rifle. "They can be hurt, but not killed," Marcus replied grimly. "Did you see how they moved after being shot? Like the bullets just passed through liquid." The siege continued through the night. The creatures tested our defenses, probing for weaknesses, but they seemed reluctant to make another direct assault. Instead, they employed psychological warfare, using the voices of everyone we'd ever cared about to try to lure us outside. They knew things they shouldn't have known. Personal details, private conversations, intimate moments between Marcus and his ex-wife that made him flinch with recognition and pain. They spoke in the voice of my grandmother, who'd died when I was 12, reciting the bedtime story she used to tell me word for word. "Sarah, honey," my grandmother's voice called from the darkness. "Come give Grandma a hug. I've missed you so much." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice continued, patient and loving, and absolutely wrong. As dawn approached, the creatures began to retreat deeper into the forest, their forms becoming indistinct in the growing light. By the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks, they had vanished entirely, leaving behind only disturbed earth and that lingering wrongness in the air. "Are they gone?" I asked, peering out through the bullet-holed windshield. "For now," Marcus said, "but they'll be back tonight. We have to get out of here before then." The engine started on the first try, and we began making our way carefully through the forest. In daylight, I could see that we were following something that might charitably be called a trail. 2 ruts through the underbrush, overgrown and barely visible. It couldn't have supported RV traffic in years, if ever. "How did we get here?" I asked. "This isn't the same road we took coming in." Marcus didn't answer, his attention focused on navigating around fallen logs and washouts. The forest pressed close on both sides, branches scraping against the RV's windows and walls. More than once we had to stop while Marcus got out to move debris from our path. It was during one of these stops that I saw the sign, partially hidden by undergrowth, weathered and bullet-riddled, but still readable. "Danger. Authorized personnel only. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Below that, in smaller text, U.S. government property, biological research facility. "Marcus," I called softly, "come look at this." He read the sign, his face growing pale. "Government research facility? Out here?" I pushed aside more of the undergrowth, revealing additional signs. Warnings about biohazards, radiation, contaminated soil, and at the bottom, a date that made my blood run cold. The facility had been abandoned in 1962. "Biological research?" I said. "What kind of biological research?" We didn't stay to speculate. Whatever had happened here over 60 years ago, it was connected to the things that had stalked us through the night. The road, such as it was, led away from the facility deeper into the forest, and we followed it with desperate hope. Hours passed. The forest gradually thinned, the oppressive canopy giving way to more open woodland. And finally, blessedly, we saw it ahead. A real road, paved and lined with familiar reflective markers. We emerged from the forest like refugees from a war zone, the RV's exterior scratched and dented, its windshield spider-webbed with cracks. Marcus pulled over at the first gas station we found and sat shaking behind the wheel. "What do we tell people?" he asked. Who would believe us? I didn't have an answer. The official story became a simple one. We'd gotten lost on back roads, had some trouble with wildlife, and decided to cut the trip short. The insurance adjuster who looked at the RV damage accepted our explanation of aggressive bears without question. But sometimes, late at night, I hear them calling. Not outside my house. I live in the suburbs now, surrounded by streetlights and traffic noise. But in my dreams, in the space between sleeping and waking, I hear those voices. My mother, my father, my grandmother, all calling to me with perfect inflection and hollow wrongness. "Sarah, honey," they say, "why don't you come back? We're still waiting for you." Marcus sold the RV a week after we got home. He wouldn't talk about what happened, wouldn't even acknowledge that anything unusual had occurred. But I see the way he checks his locks at night, the way he flinches at unexpected sounds. I've done research since then, digging through declassified government documents and old newspaper archives. The facility we found was part of a Cold War-era program, officially shut down after an incident involving biological containment failure. The few details that weren't redacted mentioned aggressive mimicry and adaptive camouflage in test subjects. Whatever those scientists created in that remote forest lab, it's still there, still waiting in the shadows between the trees, learning new voices, perfecting new lures. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the night is very quiet, I think I can hear them practicing, getting ready for the next group of campers who think they've found the perfect, secluded spot, the ones who don't know that some places are empty for a reason. I never went camping again. We should have never gone to Dead Horse Point. I'm Marcus Powell. I was 42 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. The idea seemed perfect at the time. Sarah and I had been talking about taking the kids on a real adventure, something to break us out of the suburban routine that had been slowly suffocating our marriage for the past 3 years. When I found the deal on the RV rental, a massive 35-foot Winnebago that could sleep 8, it felt like fate. Emma, our 16-year-old, had been distant and moody since starting junior year. Jake, our 12-year-old, spent most of his time glued to his gaming console. Sarah worked 60-hour weeks at the hospital, and I'd been putting in overtime at the accounting firm just to keep up with the mortgage. Utah, I told Sarah one evening in March, spreading maps across our kitchen table. Look at this. Dead Horse Point State Park. It's like nothing we've ever seen. The kids will love it. Sarah looked up from her laptop, exhaustion etched around her eyes. How much? The RV rentals covered. Gas, food, camping fees. Maybe $800 total for a week. A week? She closed the laptop. Marcus, I can't take a week off. The ER is already understaffed and 5 days then. Long weekend. I leaned forward, reaching for her hand. When's the last time we did something together as a family? Really? Together? She studied the map, tracing the red line I'd drawn from our home in Denver to the Utah desert. Dead Horse Point sat on a mesa 2,000 feet above the Colorado River, surrounded by red rock canyons and endless wilderness. The promotional photos showed impossible vistas, rock formations that looked like alien cathedrals, and skies so vast they made you feel like you could see the curve of the earth. "The kids won't want to come," she said finally. "They will. No cell service out there. They'll have to talk to us." Sarah's smile was tired but genuine. "You really think this will fix everything?" I should have known then that some things can't be fixed with a change of scenery. 2 weeks later, we picked up the RV from Desert Wind Rentals just outside Moab. The owner, a weathered man named Carl with arms covered in faded tattoos, walked us through the vehicle's systems while the kids explored the interior. "First time in one of these?" Carl asked, watching me struggle with the wastewater hookup. "Yeah, how hard can it be, right?" Carl's laugh was dry as the desert air around us. "Famous last words. You headed up to Arches?" Most folks do. Dead Horse Point, I said. State park, not the national park. Figured it'd be less crowded. Carl's expression changed. His hand stilled on the propane valve he'd been adjusting. Dead Horse Point. You know it? Know it. He wiped his hands on a rag, not meeting my eyes. You staying in the developed campground or heading out to the backcountry? Backcountry. Found this spot on the map. Maybe 5 miles past the main overlook. Supposed to be incredible views and total isolation. Carl was quiet for a long moment, studying the ground. When he looked up, his face was serious. Listen, friend. I've been renting RVs for 15 years, guided tours before that. Been all over this desert. That area you're talking about, folks don't camp there much. Why not? Just don't. A lot of places to camp around here. Beautiful places. Stick to the developed sites, yeah? I felt a flicker of annoyance. Is there something specific I should know about? Carl glanced toward the RV where Sarah was helping Jake figure out how to work the fold-out dinette. Probably nothing. Desert gets in people's heads sometimes. Makes them see things, hear things. But that particular stretch... He shook his head. Had a family go missing out there about 10 years back. Never found them. RV was still there, all their stuff. Food on the table like they just stepped out for a walk. Missing persons case doesn't mean the location is cursed, I said, forcing a laugh. No, it doesn't. Carl handed me the keys, his fingers lingering on mine for a moment. Just, if something doesn't feel right out there, trust that feeling. Desert's bigger than all of us. I took the keys, already dismissing his words as small-town superstition. We'll be fine. The drive to Dead Horse Point took 2 hours, winding through red rock canyons and past mesas that looked like sleeping giants. The kids' complaints about the lack of Wi-Fi faded as the landscape grew more alien and beautiful. Even Emma put down her dead phone to stare out the window. It's like Mars, Jake said, pressing his face against the glass. More beautiful than Mars, Sarah said from the passenger seat. She'd relaxed visibly once we'd left the city behind. This was already working. The main overlook at Dead Horse Point was crowded with tourists snapping photos of the Colorado River far below. The views were spectacular. A panorama of canyons and mesas stretching to the horizon under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. But I had my heart set on the backcountry spot I'd marked on the map. We continued past the main campground, following a rough dirt road that wound through juniper trees and around massive sandstone formations. The farther we drove from the developed area, the more the landscape seemed to change. The red rock took on darker hues, almost purple in the late afternoon light. The trees grew sparse and twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. "Are you sure this is right?" Sarah asked, studying the GPS. "The road's not on here. It's on the paper map," I said, though I was beginning to wonder myself. The road had narrowed to barely more than a track, and I could hear scrub brush scraping against the RV's sides. "Maybe we should go back," Emma said. "This looks like the kind of place where people get murdered in horror movies." "Nobody's getting murdered," I said, but her words sent an unexpected chill down my spine. The landscape around us was beautiful but alien, like we'd driven onto another planet. Not a single man-made structure was visible in any direction. We rounded a bend, and suddenly the road opened into a broad mesa top. The view was incredible. We were positioned on the edge of a cliff with the Colorado River visible as a green ribbon thousands of feet below. Red Rock Canyon stretched endlessly in every direction, and the silence was so complete it felt alive. "Wow," Jake breathed. "This is it," I said, pulling the RV to a stop near a cluster of twisted juniper trees. "This is perfect." Setting up camp took longer than expected. The RV's leveling jacks kept slipping on the uneven ground, and the generator wouldn't start on the first few tries. By the time we had everything ready, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and red that seemed to glow from within. We cooked dinner on the RV's small stove. Nothing fancy, just hot dogs and beans. But somehow it tasted better than any restaurant meal. The kids actually talked to each other without fighting. Sarah laughed at my jokes. For a few hours, we were the family I remembered being. As full darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. The desert cold was different from Colorado cold, drier, sharper, seeming to seep into your bones. We retreated into the RV, but I couldn't resist stepping outside one more time to look at the stars. I'd never seen anything like it. With no light pollution for 50 miles in any direction, the Milky Way was visible as a bright river across the sky. Stars glittered like diamonds on black velvet, so many that they seemed to overlap and blend together. But as I stood there, craning my neck to take it all in, I became aware of something else. A sound, barely audible, like wind through the trees. Except there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. I held my breath, listening. The sound came again, a low, rhythmic whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. It reminded me of voices, many voices, all speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand. "Marcus!" Sarah's voice from the RV doorway made me jump. "You okay?" "Fine," I said. But as I turned to go back inside, I could have sworn I saw movement in the darkness beyond the trees. Something large and pale that disappeared the moment I looked directly at it. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness, playing tricks on me in the unfamiliar landscape. But as I closed the RV door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the shadows. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of Jake crying. Sarah was already stirring in the bed beside me. The RV's built-in bedroom was cramped but comfortable, separated from the main living area by a thin accordion door. Through it, I could hear Jake's muffled sobs coming from the converted dinette where he was sleeping. "Bad dream," Sarah whispered, starting to get up. "I'll go," I said, slipping out of bed and padding barefoot to the main area. Jake was sitting up in his makeshift bed, tears streaming down his face. Emma was awake in the overhead bunk, peering down at her brother with concern. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting on the edge of the dinette. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," Jake whispered. They were talking to me. A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I heard voices. They were calling my name. Jake pointed toward the small window above his bed. They wanted me to come outside. I looked toward the window. The thin curtains we'd drawn before bed were backlit by starlight, casting everything in a ghostly blue glow. "It was just a dream, Jake. Nobody knows we're out here." "It wasn't a dream. Listen." We all fell silent. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the RV's refrigerator and the faint whistle of wind around the vehicle's corners. Then I heard it, the same whispered voices I'd noticed earlier, but louder now, more distinct. They seemed to be circling the RV. "Dad," Emma said from above, her voice tight with fear. "What is that?" I stood up, moving toward the main door. "Stay here." "Marcus, don't." Sarah appeared in the bedroom doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "It's probably just the wind through the rocks," I said, but my hand was shaking as I reached for the door handle. I opened the door a crack and peered out. The desert night was perfectly still. No wind, no movement, nothing but the endless expanse of red rock and twisted trees under the star-filled sky. But the voices continued, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As I listened, I began to make out individual words, though in what language I couldn't say. The voices were different, some high and thin like children's voices, others deep and resonant. They seemed to be having a conversation, but about what? I couldn't tell. Then Jake's name came through clearly, spoken in a voice that sounded almost exactly like my own. I slammed the door shut and locked it. "What did you see?" Sarah asked. "Nothing, it's just acoustic effect. Sound travels funny in the desert." I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside, my heart was hammering. The voices continued for another hour, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always just beyond understanding. None of us slept. Morning brought relief and embarrassment in equal measure. In the bright desert sunlight, our fears of the night before seemed foolish. The whispered voices were obviously wind through the rock formations. Jake's nightmare was just that, a nightmare brought on by the unfamiliar environment and Emma's horror movie comments. We made breakfast on the camp stove outside the RV, eggs and bacon that sizzled in the thin air. The kids were tired but in good spirits, and the incredible views made up for the rough night. "Look at that," Emma said, pointing toward a red rock spire that jutted up from the canyon floor like a church steeple. "It's beautiful." "Should we hike down there?" Jake asked. I consulted the topographic map. "It's pretty steep. Maybe we can find an easier trail." But when I looked for the trail markers I'd noted on the map, they weren't there. In fact, as I studied our surroundings more carefully, I realized nothing quite matched what I'd expected. The rock formations were different. The relationship to the river below was wrong. Even the species of trees seemed odd. "Honey," Sarah said, looking over my shoulder at the map, "where exactly are we?" That was a good question. The GPS in the RV showed our location as a blank spot with no roads or landmarks. According to the device, we were sitting in the middle of empty desert, miles from any recognized feature. "The GPS is probably just acting up out here," I said. "Too remote for good satellite coverage." But as the day wore on, other small things began to bother me. The shadows fell wrong, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The silence was too complete. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even our voices seemed muffled, as if the desert itself was absorbing sound. And there were the trees. The junipers around our campsite were ancient, their trunks twisted into impossible spirals, their branches forming intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Jake became fascinated with them, spending hours examining their bark and counting the rings where branches had broken off. "Dad, look at this," he called out in the afternoon, pointing to symbols carved into one of the trunks. I walked over to see what he'd found. The markings were definitely human-made, a series of curved lines and dots that formed a pattern I didn't recognize. They looked old, the bark having partially grown over them, but they were still clearly visible. "Probably some kind of Native American petroglyphs," I said, though something about them made my skin crawl. "There are more over here," Emma called from another tree. She was right. As we looked around the campsite, we found the markings on most of the older trees. Always the same pattern, always carved at roughly head height, always on the side facing our RV. "It's like they're pointing at us," Jake said. Sarah laughed, but it sounded forced. "Don't be silly. They were here long before we were." But were they? As I looked more closely, some of the carvings looked fresh. The bark around them was still bleeding sap, as if they'd been cut recently. Very recently. That afternoon, while Sarah and the kids napped in the air-conditioned RV, I decided to explore the area around our campsite. I told myself I was looking for hiking trails, but really I was trying to shake the growing feeling that something was wrong with this place. I walked to the edge of the mesa, where the ground dropped away into the vast canyon below. The views were spectacular, but as I stood there, I became aware of a sound. That same rhythmic whispering I'd heard the night before, but much fainter now, barely audible above the wind. Following the sound, I walked along the canyon rim until I found its source, a natural opening in the rock, like a cave mouth, that descended into darkness. The whispers seemed to be coming from deep within. I knelt at the opening, listening. The voices were clearer here, and I could almost make out words. They seemed to be speaking English, but in accents I didn't recognize. Some sounded foreign, others seemed to come from different time periods, like actors in old movies. One voice, clearer than the others, made my blood freeze. "Marcus!" It was my own voice, calling from the depths of the cave. "Marcus, come down here. I want to show you something." I scrambled backward from the opening, my heart pounding. But even as I retreated, I could hear other voices joining in. Sarah's voice, Emma's, Jake's, all calling for me to come into the darkness. I ran back to the RV. That evening, nobody wanted to cook outside. We heated canned soup on the RV's stove and ate in uncomfortable silence, all of us glancing nervously at the windows. The sun set earlier than expected, and darkness seemed to fall like a curtain being dropped. "I want to go home," Jake said quietly. "Tomorrow," I lied. "We'll head back tomorrow morning." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure we could. Throughout the day, I'd tried repeatedly to start the RV's engine, wanting to move to a different campsite. Each time, it had turned over but failed to catch. The battery was fine, the fuel tank was full, but something was keeping the engine from running. As night deepened, the whispers began again. This time, we were all awake to hear them clearly. The voices circled the RV like a pack of wolves, speaking in that strange mix of languages and accents. Sometimes they called our names. Sometimes they seemed to be having conversations with each other. Sometimes they fell silent for long periods, only to resume when we'd begun to relax. "They're not real," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking. "It's just the wind." But wind doesn't know your children's names. Around midnight, Jake started crying again. "They want me to open the door," he said. "They keep asking me to let them in." "Don't listen to them," Emma said. But I could see she was terrified too. I checked all the door and window locks, made sure the curtains were tightly drawn. The RV felt like a fortress, but a small one, surrounded by something vast and patient and hungry. The voices continued until dawn. On the third day, Jake disappeared. We'd all overslept, exhausted from another sleepless night. When Sarah and I woke up around 10 a.m., the kids were gone from their beds. Emma's bunk was empty, and Jake's dinette bed showed signs of hasty abandonment. His pillow on the floor, his blankets kicked aside. "Emma? Jake?" Sarah called, checking the tiny RV bathroom. They weren't inside. We found Emma sitting outside, her back against the RV's rear wheel, staring out at the desert with hollow eyes. "Where's your brother?" I asked. "Gone," she said without looking at me. "What do you mean, gone?" "He went into the trees. I told him not to, but he said they were calling him. He said someone wanted to show him something cool." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. "That was maybe an hour ago." Sarah and I exchanged looks. "Which way did he go?" Emma pointed toward the twisted junipers on the far side of the campsite. "That way, toward the voices." I grabbed a flashlight from the RV, even though it was broad daylight. Something about the shadows under those trees seemed to swallow light. "Stay with your mother," I told Emma. "Don't go anywhere." The trees were worse up close. Their trunks were twisted into patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The carved symbols were everywhere, and they definitely looked fresh now. The bark around them was actively bleeding sap, as if the cuts were still healing. "Jake," I called. "Jake, where are you?" My voice seemed muffled, absorbed by the strange silence that hung over this place like a blanket. I pushed deeper into the grove, following what looked like a path between the trees. That's when I found Jake's shoes. They were sitting side by side in a small clearing, as if he'd carefully removed them and placed them there. His socks were folded neatly inside. Beyond the shoes, the path continued deeper into the trees, but there was no sign of Jake. "Jake!" I shouted, louder now. "This isn't funny. Come back!" Something answered me. A voice that sounded exactly like Jake's, coming from deeper in the grove. "Dad, I'm over here. Come see what I found." I followed the voice, crashing through undergrowth and around massive tree trunks. The grove seemed much larger than it had appeared from the outside, stretching on and on like a maze. Several times I thought I glimpsed movement ahead of me. A flash of Jake's red t-shirt, a glimpse of his brown hair, but every time I reached the spot there was nothing there. The voice kept calling, always just ahead, always just out of sight. "Dad, hurry! You have to see this." But it was wrong. The voice was Jake's, but the words weren't. Jake never called me Dad. It was always Daddy, a habit I'd been trying to break but secretly loved. And there was something else, something in the tone that made my skin crawl. I stopped running and stood still, listening. The voice called again. "Dad, where are you? I'm scared." It was coming from behind me now. I turned around, but the path I'd been following was gone. In every direction, twisted trees stretched into shadowy distance. I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The carved symbols on their trunks pulsed with a faint phosphorescent glow, like bioluminescent algae, and the whispers were getting louder. They came from all around me now, no longer distant but close, intimate, as if the speakers were standing just behind each tree. I began to make out individual voices among the chorus, and what I heard made my blood run cold. They were the voices of my family. Sarah, Emma, Jake, but wrong somehow, like recordings played at the wrong speed. They were having conversations I remembered from years past, but twisted, corrupted. Sarah's voice, "Marcus is losing his mind. We should leave him here." Emma's voice, "Dad never loved us anyway. He's better off alone." Jake's voice, "I don't want to be his son anymore. I want to stay with the others." I knew it wasn't real, knew it was some kind of trick, but the words still cut deep. I stumbled through the grove, calling for Jake, calling for anyone, but the only responses were those horrible distorted voices mocking me with my own memories. Then I saw the cave. It was the same opening I'd found the day before, but it was here now, in the heart of the grove, surrounded by the twisted trees. The whispers were loudest here, pouring out of the darkness like smoke, and I could see light down there, a faint, phosphorescent glow that seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Jake's voice came from the depths. "Daddy, I'm down here. I'm scared. Please come get me." Daddy. The right word this time. My heart lurched and I started toward the cave mouth. Then I heard Sarah screaming from the direction of the RV. I don't remember running back through the grove. One moment, I was standing at the cave entrance listening to Jake's voice calling from the darkness, and the next I was stumbling out of the trees into the bright desert sunlight, my clothes torn by branches, my hands scratched and bleeding. Sarah was standing beside the RV, her face white with terror. Emma was behind her, clutching her mother's arm. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded. "Where's Jake?" "I don't know. I heard his voice, but..." "What voice? Jake's been here the whole time." I stopped, confused. "What?" "Jake came back 20 minutes ago," Emma said, "while you were in the trees. He said he just went to look at the rocks." I turned around and there was Jake sitting in one of our folding chairs by the RV, eating a sandwich. He looked perfectly normal. Same red t-shirt, same brown hair, same 12-year-old face. But when he looked up at me, his smile was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. "Hi, Daddy," he said. "Did you find me?" My blood turned to ice. Jake never called me Daddy anymore. Not for years. And his voice. It was Jake's voice, but underneath it was something else. Something that whispered and rustled like wind through dead leaves. "Jake," I said carefully, "where did you go this morning?" "Just to look at the pretty trees," he said, still smiling that horrible smile. "I met some new friends. They taught me games." Sarah was looking back and forth between us, sensing something wrong but not understanding what. "Marcus, what's going on?" I stared at the thing that looked like my son. "What kind of games?" "Hide and seek," Jake said. "And other games, fun games. They want to play with Emma next." Emma stepped backward. "Jake, you're being weird." "Am I?" Jake's head tilted to one side farther than it should have been able to go. "I feel different. Better. Happier." He looked directly at me. "Don't you want to be happier, Daddy?" I grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to go. Right now." "Marcus! Right now!" I pushed past Jake, or whatever it was, and fumbled with the RV's keys. Behind me I could hear Jake laughing, a sound like breaking glass. The engine wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but nothing happened. Not even the clicking sound of a dead battery. It was as if the engine wasn't there at all. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. It was working fine yesterday." But that was a lie. The engine hadn't worked since we'd arrived at this place. Jake appeared at the passenger window, still wearing that awful smile. "Having trouble, Daddy? Maybe I can help. My new friends are very good with machines." I looked at him through the glass. In the bright sunlight I could see things that shouldn't have been there. Shadows moving beneath his skin, something that might have been scales along his neck. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "That's not Jake," I whispered. Sarah stared at me. "What did you say?" "That's not our son." What followed was the worst argument of our marriage. Sarah thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Stress, altitude, the isolation getting to me. She couldn't see what I saw when I looked at Jake. To her, he appeared perfectly normal, if a little quiet. But Emma saw it too, I think. She kept staring at her brother with a puzzled expression, like she was trying to solve a problem she couldn't quite articulate. Several times I caught her whispering to Sarah, pointing at Jake when he wasn't looking. "He's different," Emma said. "He's not talking like himself. And Mom, look at his eyes. Really look." Sarah looked, but she didn't see what we saw. Or maybe she couldn't let herself see it. The thing that looked like Jake spent the afternoon sitting in the shade beside the RV, perfectly still, perfectly patient. It didn't fidget like Jake usually did. It didn't ask for snacks or complain about being bored. It just sat there, smiling, watching us with those wrong eyes. As the sun began to set, I made a decision. "We're hiking out," I told Sarah. "Tonight." "Hiking? Marcus, it's 20 miles to the nearest road. We can make it. Pack light. Water, snacks, emergency supplies. We leave after dark." "What about Jake?" I looked at the thing sitting by the RV. It was still smiling, but now the smile seemed predatory, like it was listening to every word. "Jake comes with us." But I had no intention of taking that thing with us. My plan was simple. Wait until it fell asleep, then slip away with Sarah and Emma. We'd follow our tire tracks back to the main road, hike all night if we had to. Once we reached civilization, we'd figure out what to do about Jake. The real Jake. Because he was still alive, somewhere. I was sure of it. The voice I'd heard in the cave had been him. The real him, calling for help. We'd come back with the authorities, with search and rescue teams, with whatever it took to get him out of that place. But the thing didn't sleep. As night fell and the whispers began again, the Jake thing remained sitting in its chair, perfectly motionless, staring out at the desert. Its smile never wavered. It didn't blink. Sarah and Emma eventually dozed fitfully in the RV, but I stayed awake, watching through the window, waiting for my chance. Around midnight, I thought I saw it. The Jake thing's head nodded forward slightly, as if it was finally succumbing to sleep. I waited another 20 minutes, then carefully opened the RV door. The desert night was cold and still. The whispers had faded to barely audible murmurs. I could see the Jake thing in its chair, silhouetted against the starlight, head down, seemingly unconscious. I crept back into the RV and gently shook Sarah awake. "It's time," I whispered. "Time for what?" "To go. Wake up, Emma, but quietly." Sarah looked confused, but did as I asked. Within minutes, we were dressed and ready with small backpacks containing water and emergency supplies. I'd plotted our route on the map, due east to intersect with the main park road, then south toward the highway. If we pushed hard, we could be back to civilization by dawn. I opened the RV door as quietly as possible and peered out. The Jake thing hadn't moved. Its breathing was slow and regular, like genuine sleep. We crept past it, single file, moving toward the tire tracks that marked our way in. I was in the lead, Sarah behind me, Emma bringing up the rear. For the first 100 yards, everything went according to plan. Then Emma screamed. I spun around to see the Jake thing standing directly behind her, no longer pretending to sleep. In the starlight, it looked even less human than before. Its limbs too long, its joints bending in impossible directions. Its smile stretched far too wide across its face. "Where are we going?" it asked in Jake's voice. "This looks like a fun game." Sarah stared at the thing, and finally, I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. Horror, disbelief, but also recognition. "What are you?" she whispered. The Jake thing's head tilted at that impossible angle again. "I'm your son. Don't you love me, Mommy?" Emma was backing away, tears streaming down her face. "That's not Jake. That's not my brother. Of course I'm Jake," the thing said, reaching out with fingers that were far too long. "I'm just better now. My new friends taught me how to be better. They want to teach all of us." That's when I heard them. The whispers, rising from the darkness all around us. But they weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, clear and distinct, and they belonged to people I'd never met but somehow recognized. A woman's voice, "Don't leave us alone out here. We've been waiting so long." A man's voice, "We just want to play. We just want to be a family again." A child's voice, "Daddy, why won't you look at me?" I'm trying to show you something wonderful." I understood then. The family Carl had mentioned, the ones who'd gone missing 10 years ago. They were still here, still part of this place, calling to others to join them. And now they had Jake. "Run," I said. We scattered in different directions. I heard Sarah cry out, heard Emma sobbing, but I couldn't stop to help them. The voices were everywhere now, surrounding us, and I could see shapes moving in the darkness. People-shaped things that moved wrong, bent wrong, smiled wrong. I ran toward where I thought the road might be, stumbling over rocks and through sagebrush, guided only by starlight. Behind me, the voices called out in familiar tones. Sarah's voice pleading for me to come back, Emma's voice saying she was hurt and needed help, Jake's voice asking why I was abandoning him. But I knew they weren't my family. Not anymore. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Then I crawled until I found a crevice between two rocks where I could hide. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the map with shaking hands. According to my compass, I'd been running north, away from the road. I was deeper in the wilderness now, farther from help, but I couldn't go back. Those things, whatever they were, would be waiting. I spent the rest of the night in that crevice, listening to voices calling my name from the darkness. Sometimes they sounded like my family. Sometimes they sounded like strangers. Once, I could have sworn I heard my own father's voice, though he'd been dead for 15 years. When dawn finally came, the voices faded. I climbed out of my hiding place and got my bearings. The main park road was somewhere to the south. If I walked all day, I might reach it by evening. It took 2 days. I was delirious from dehydration and exposure when the park rangers found me stumbling along Highway 313, 20 miles from our campsite. They took me to the hospital in Moab, where I spent 3 days recovering and trying to convince anyone who would listen that my family was still out there, that something in the desert had taken them. The search and rescue teams found our RV exactly where we'd left it. All of our belongings were still there, including Sarah's purse, Emma's phone, and Jake's favorite stuffed animal. There were signs that people had left the campsite on foot, but the tracks disappeared after a few hundred yards, obscured by wind and the rocky ground. The official report listed Sarah, Emma, and Jake as missing persons, presumed dead from exposure. The case remains open, but no one searches for them anymore. It's been 3 years. I know they're still alive, somewhere in that maze of twisted trees and whispering caves. Changed, transformed into something else, but alive. Sometimes I dream about them, and in those dreams they're smiling, those terrible smiles, asking why I left them behind. I've tried to go back. Twice I've driven to the area with professional guides and search teams, but we've never been able to find the exact spot where we camped. The GPS coordinates I recorded don't match any location on the maps. It's as if that place exists outside normal geography, accessible only to those it chooses to claim. The rangers think I'm crazy. The grief counselors think I'm in denial. My insurance company thinks I'm trying to commit fraud. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to my family. And sometimes, late at night, I think they're trying to find their way back to me. It started 3 months after I returned home to Denver. Small things at first, items moved around the house while I was at work, food disappearing from the refrigerator, the sound of familiar voices coming from empty rooms. I told myself it was grief, trauma, my mind trying to cope with the loss. Then I found Jake's shoes in my closet. Not shoes like the ones he'd been wearing. The exact same shoes I'd found in that clearing in the grove. Dirty, worn, with the same scuff mark on the left toe where he'd kicked a soccer ball too hard. They were sitting on my closet floor as if he'd just taken them off, still warm to the touch. I threw them away, but they came back the next night. This time, they were by the front door, as if someone had just walked in from outside. The phone calls started after that. Always late at night, always from numbers that didn't exist when I tried to call them back. Sometimes I'd hear breathing, soft and patient. Sometimes there would be whispers in that familiar chorus of voices. Once, I heard Jake crying and asking when I was coming back for him. I changed my number. The calls continued. I moved to a different house across town. They followed me there. I started drinking, thinking alcohol might quiet the voices, might make the impossible things go away. Instead, it made them worse. In my drunken stupors, I'd see them clearly. Sarah standing in my bedroom doorway with that terrible smile, Emma sitting at my kitchen table doing homework she'd never finish, Jake playing with toys that left no trace when I sobered up. The psychiatrists have names for what they think is wrong with me: post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated grief, psychotic break. They've prescribed medications that make the world fuzzy around the edges but don't stop the voices. They've suggested therapies that involve talking about my feelings and accepting the reality of loss. But how do you accept a reality that keeps shifting under your feet? Last week, I found a letter on my kitchen counter. It was written in Emma's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. Those careful loops and flourishes she'd practiced for hours. The paper was old and stained, as if it had been buried in the desert for years. "Daddy," it read, "we're waiting for you to come home. We've learned so many new things and we want to show you. The others say you're scared, but you don't need to be. We're still your family. We love you. Come back to the trees and we'll all be together again, forever and ever. Love, Emma." At the bottom, there were symbols. The same curved lines and dots I'd seen carved into the junipers. Looking at them made my eyes water and my head spin, as if they were moving even though the paper was perfectly still. I burned the letter, but I kept a photograph of it. Sometimes I take it out and stare at those symbols, trying to understand what they mean. They seem familiar, like a language I once knew but have forgotten. The dreams are getting stronger too. Every night now, I'm back in that grove of twisted trees, following voices deeper and deeper into the maze. Sometimes I find caves that descend into phosphorescent depths. Sometimes I find clearings where pale figures dance in circles around fires that burn without fuel. Always, I hear my family calling for me. "Daddy, come play with us. Marcus, we're so cold out here. We miss you. Why won't you come home?" In the dreams, I want to go to them. The longing is almost unbearable, a physical ache in my chest. They look happy in their strange new forms, peaceful in a way they never were in life. Jake's smile is genuine now, not forced. Emma laughs with pure joy. Sarah's eyes are bright with love. But I wake up before I can reach them. Always wake up just as I'm about to step into their embrace. 2 nights ago, I made a decision. I've sold everything. The house, the car, my remaining possessions. I've withdrawn my savings, canceled my insurance, resigned from my job. There's nothing left to tie me to this world of bills and responsibilities and people who think I'm insane. I bought a Jeep, 4-wheel drive, built for desert terrain. I've loaded it with supplies. Water, food, camping gear, everything I need for an extended stay in the wilderness. And I've studied the maps, cross-referenced satellite images, talked to every park ranger and guide who'll listen. I'm going back to find them, not to rescue them. I understand now that they don't want to be rescued. They found something in that place, something that makes them happy in a way the ordinary world never could. They've transcended the limitations of human flesh, become part of something larger and stranger and more wonderful than anything I can imagine from this side of the transformation. They're waiting for me to join them. The rational part of my mind, the part that still remembers being a suburban accountant with a mortgage and a 401k, knows this is madness. It knows I'm planning to drive into the desert and die there. Probably of exposure or dehydration, certainly alone. It knows my family is gone, that the voices and visions are products of a mind broken by grief and trauma. But the larger part of me, the part that has been growing stronger each day since I returned from Utah, knows better. It knows that some things are more important than staying safe, staying sane, staying alive in the conventional sense. Love is one of those things. I leave tomorrow at dawn. I've written this account partly as an explanation, partly as a warning, but mostly as a record. If someone finds it, if someone reads these words, maybe they'll understand what really happened out there in the desert. Or maybe they'll think I was just another sad man who lost his family and couldn't cope with the reality. Either way, it doesn't matter now. I can hear them calling tonight, clearer than ever before. Sarah's voice threading through the wind that rattles my windows. Emma's laughter echoing from the empty rooms. Jake's little boy whisper asking when I'm coming to play. Soon, I tell them. Very soon. The map is spread on my kitchen table, marked with the best approximation I can make of where we camped. The Jeep is loaded and fueled. I've left copies of this account with my lawyer, with the police, with anyone who might care to know what happened to Marcus Powell and his family. In a few hours, I'll drive back into that red rock country where the trees grow in impossible spirals and the voices of the dead whisper from hidden caves. I'll find the grove where my son's shoes wait in a circle of phosphorescent symbols. I'll follow the paths that lead down into darkness and strange light. And if I'm very lucky, very brave, very willing to let go of everything I think I know about what's real and what's possible, I'll find my family waiting for me. They'll smile those beautiful, terrible smiles, and I'll finally understand what they've become. What we'll all become, together. The whispers are getting louder now. Through my bedroom walls, I can hear the sound of children playing, the rustle of wind through juniper branches, the echo of voices calling from the depths of the earth. Daddy. Jake's voice floats through the darkness. We can see you from here. We're almost home. I'm coming, son. Daddy's coming home. This document was found in the abandoned Denver home of Marcus Powell, along with extensive maps of southeastern Utah marked with symbols matching those described in his account. Powell's Jeep was discovered 3 weeks later near Dead Horse Point State Park, empty of supplies but showing no signs of mechanical failure. Powell himself has never been found. The case remains open, though searches were discontinued after 6 months. Park officials note that the area described in Powell's account does not correspond to any known location within the park boundaries. A small addendum. Park rangers have reported a significant increase in missing persons cases in the Dead Horse Point area over the past year. All involve families or groups of campers who venture into undeveloped areas and are never seen again. Their vehicles are typically found abandoned but intact, with personal belongings left behind. No bodies have ever been recovered. Local Navajo traditions speak of a place in the Red Rock country where the boundaries between worlds grow thin, where spirits of the dead can cross back into the realm of the living. They call it the Grove of Whispers, and warn that those who enter seeking the voices of lost loved ones may find more than they bargained for. Rangers officially dismiss such stories as folklore, but unofficially, many refuse to patrol certain areas alone. The disappearances continue. We should have never gone to Ohei Canyon lands. I'm Sarah Rodriguez. I was 34 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything. The idea for the RV trip came from Marcus, my husband of 8 years. He'd been talking about getting back to nature ever since his promotion to senior architect had him chained to a desk 14 hours a day. Our marriage had been strained, reduced to passing conversations about mortgage payments and whose turn it was to take out the trash. The spontaneous, adventurous couple who'd backpacked through Costa Rica on our honeymoon had somehow morphed into 2 strangers sharing a mortgage. Just us, the open road, and 3 weeks off the grid, Marcus had said, showing me the glossy RV rental brochure. Remember when we used to talk about seeing the country, before work and bills and everything? I'd wanted to say no. My job as a pediatric nurse at Denver General was demanding enough without taking 3 weeks away, and something about the idea of being trapped in a 30-foot metal box with Marcus felt suffocating rather than romantic. But the desperate hope in his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he said everything, made me nod instead. That's how we ended up in a 2019 Winnebago Adventurer, heading northwest toward Idaho's most remote wilderness. Marcus had picked Ohei Canyon lands because it was untouched, which should have been our first warning. The place was untouched for a reason. The drive from Denver took 2 days. We stopped the first night at a KOA outside Salt Lake City, plugging into electrical hookups like any normal RV tourists. The second day took us deep into southeastern Idaho, where the landscape gradually shifted from high desert scrub to something more primal. Red rock formations jutted from sagebrush valleys like ancient monuments, and the sky seemed to stretch impossibly wide, as if we'd driven off the edge of the world. By late afternoon on day 2, we reached what Marcus had marked on his map as Coyote Springs Primitive Camping. The name alone should have sent us back to civilization, but we were committed to this adventure, this attempt to salvage whatever was left of us. The campsite wasn't much, just a dirt clearing surrounded by towering red canyon walls with a hand pump well and a fire ring made of stacked stones. No cell service, no electrical hookups, no other campers, just us and the immensity of the high desert. "This is perfect," Marcus said as he maneuvered the RV into position. His voice carried that forced enthusiasm I'd grown to recognize, the same tone he used when talking about quality time or working on us. But as he stepped out and breathed deeply, something in his shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. I had to admit, the place was beautiful in a stark, almost alien way. The canyon walls rose 300 feet on either side of us, layered in shades of rust and amber that would catch fire when the sun set. A narrow creek wound through the bottom of the canyon, its water so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom. "Look at this," Marcus called from behind the RV, where he was setting up our folding chairs. No city lights, no traffic noise, just us and this. He gestured toward the canyon walls, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. The way his face lit up when he encountered something beautiful. The genuine wonder that his demanding job had nearly beaten out of him. We spent the evening by the fire ring, sharing a bottle of wine and actually talking. Really talking. For the first time in months. Marcus told me about a project he was designing, a community center for kids in an underserved neighborhood. I found myself describing Mrs. Chen's grandson, a 6-year-old who'd been through 3 foster homes and still insisted on drawing pictures for every nurse on the ward. As the sun set, the canyon walls glowed like they were lit from within. The silence was so complete it felt alive, broken only by the whisper of wind through sage and the distant call of a coyote. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about us. That was before we heard the voices. It started around 10 p.m., just as we were getting ready to turn in for the night. Marcus was double-checking the RV's generator while I cleaned up our dinner dishes. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the canyon had settled into deep shadow except for a strip of stars visible between the walls. That's when I heard it. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling out from somewhere deeper in the canyon. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I froze, a plate halfway to the RV's tiny sink. The voice had an odd quality, like it was echoing off the canyon walls, but there was something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Marcus," I whispered, "did you hear that?" He looked up from the generator panel, frowning. "Hear what?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, we need help." Now Marcus heard it too. His head snapped toward the sound, and I saw his expression shift from confusion to concern. "Someone's in trouble," he said, already moving toward his boots. "Wait." I grabbed his arm. "Something's not right about this." "What do you mean?" "Someone needs help." But I couldn't explain the wrongness I felt. The voice was too clear, too perfect despite the distance and the canyon's acoustics. And there was something else. An odd cadence, like someone reading lines from a script. "Hello? Please, anyone." The voice seemed to move, echoing from different points along the canyon wall. Marcus shrugged off my grip and grabbed his flashlight. "I'm going to check it out." "Marcus, no. We don't know these canyons. You could get lost or—" "Sarah, someone's in trouble. I can't just ignore it." He was already walking toward the narrow trail that led deeper into the canyon. I watched his flashlight beam bounce against the red rock walls until it disappeared around a bend. I stood by the dying fire, listening to the silence. The voices had stopped as soon as Marcus left, which only made me more uneasy. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected, and tried to calm the growing anxiety in my chest. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I called Marcus's name, but only heard my own echo return from the canyon walls. 45 minutes. Now I was genuinely worried. Marcus was in good shape, but he wasn't an experienced hiker, and these canyons were full of loose rock and hidden drops. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the trail he'd taken. The path was narrow and treacherous, winding between house-sized boulders and along ledges that dropped into black depths. My light seemed pathetically small against the immensity of the canyon, and every shadow could have hidden 100 dangers. "Marcus!" I called. "Where are you?" My voice bounced off the walls in a series of diminishing echoes. "Marcus! Marcus! Marcus!" And then, impossibly, I heard his voice answer back. "Sarah, down here!" I followed the sound, my heart pounding with relief. The trail curved around a massive rock formation, and I found myself at the edge of a small amphitheater carved into the canyon floor. My flashlight beam found Marcus standing about 50 feet below me, waving up at me. "Thank God," I called down. "I was so worried. Are you hurt?" But as my light steadied on him, something made me pause. Marcus was standing perfectly still now, no longer waving, just looking up at me with an odd smile on his face. And his eyes. His eyes looked wrong in the flashlight beam, too reflective, like an animal's. "Come down, Sarah," he called. "It's beautiful down here." His voice was perfectly clear, with no echo despite the canyon's acoustics, and there was something in his tone, that same flat quality I'd noticed in the earlier voice calling for help. "How do I get down there?" I called back, playing along while every instinct screamed at me to run. "Just jump," he said, still with that wrong smile. "It's not as far as it looks." I swept my flashlight beam around the amphitheater looking for a trail down. The walls were nearly vertical, at least 40 feet high. A fall from here would mean broken bones at best. "Marcus, there's no safe way down. You need to find a way back up. Just jump, Sarah. Trust me." The thing wearing my husband's face tilted its head at an unnatural angle, still smiling that horrible smile. I backed away from the edge, my flashlight shaking in my grip. "I'm going back to get rope," I called, no longer caring if I sounded convincing. I ran back along the trail, stumbling over rocks and fighting panic. My flashlight beam danced wildly as I fled, and twice I nearly plunged over hidden drop-offs. By the time I reached our campsite, I was gasping and crying. The RV sat exactly where we'd left it, our chairs still arranged around the cold fire ring. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but Marcus wasn't here, and that thing in the canyon wasn't Marcus. I locked myself in the RV and tried to think rationally. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe the strange acoustics of the canyon had distorted his voice, made his expression look odd in the harsh LED light. Maybe he'd found a safe way down to that amphitheater, and I was letting the isolation and darkness play tricks on my mind. But I knew what I'd seen. The way he'd held his head, the absence of echo in his voice, that flat smile. And most disturbing of all, Marcus was afraid of heights. He'd never, ever suggest that someone just jump off a cliff. I tried to start the RV, thinking I could drive to somewhere with cell service and call for help, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I checked the generator Marcus had been working on. Dead. The solar batteries we'd installed for off-grid camping, drained, despite being at full charge when we'd arrived. I was trapped. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the RV's bedroom, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every sound. The canyon was never truly quiet. There were always noises. Wind through the rocks, the creek gurgling, night animals moving through the brush. But now, every sound seemed to have an intelligence behind it, a purpose. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps circling the RV. I peered through the bedroom window but could see nothing in the darkness. The steps stopped right outside the door. 3 soft knocks. "Sarah?" Marcus's voice sounding perfectly normal now. "Sarah, are you okay?" I found my way back. I pressed myself against the far wall, not answering. "I know you're in there. I saw your flashlight. What happened? Why did you run away?" The voice was concerned, confused, everything Marcus's voice should be, but I remembered that thing's smile, the wrongness of its eyes. "I got lost," the voice continued. "Spent hours trying to find my way back. Sarah, please, I need to come in. I think I hurt my ankle." I wanted to believe it. God, how I wanted to open that door and find my husband standing there, scraped and worried but whole. But something held me back. Maybe the memory of those reflective eyes, or the way the voice seemed to project too clearly through the RV's insulated walls. "Prove you're Marcus," I whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. Silence. Then, "What do you mean, prove I'm Marcus? Sarah, you're scaring me. Tell me something only Marcus would know." A long pause. When the voice came again, it carried a note of irritation. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. I'm hurt and tired and... What did we talk about on our first date?" Another pause. Longer this time. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. We talked about travel. You wanted to see the northern lights. It was a good guess, but wrong. On our first date, Marcus had spent an hour describing his grandmother's garden, the one where he'd learned to love growing things. It was such a specific, tender memory that I'd known I was falling for him before the appetizers arrived. "That's not right," I said, louder now. The footsteps resumed, circling the RV again. But now they sounded different. Heavier, with a dragging quality that made me think of something wounded, or not quite human. "Sarah." The voice was changing, losing Marcus's inflection. "Sarah, let me in." "No. I know you're afraid, but you can't stay in there forever." The footsteps stopped at the RV's rear window. I heard scratching sounds like fingernails on glass. "There are so many of us now, Sarah. So many voices in the dark. Would you like to hear them?" What followed was a symphony of horror. Voices calling from every direction. Some pleading for help, others laughing, others weeping. Men, women, children, all echoing off the canyon walls until the sound surrounded me completely. And underneath it all, I heard Marcus's voice, the real Marcus, screaming my name from somewhere far below. I covered my ears and pressed myself into the RV's corner, waiting for dawn. The voices stopped with the first light of sunrise. I waited another hour before I dared look outside. The campsite appeared exactly as we'd left it, down to our folding chairs arranged around the cold fire ring. If not for Marcus's absence, I might have convinced myself the whole thing had been a nightmare. But the scratches on the rear window were real enough. Long gouges in the safety glass, like claws had tried to tear their way inside. I had to find Marcus. The real Marcus. I spent the morning preparing. I filled water bottles, packed energy bars, and gathered every light source I could find. Flashlights, lanterns, even the RV's emergency flares. I left a note on the RV's dashboard explaining what had happened in case someone found our campsite. Then I set out for the canyon. In daylight, the trail didn't seem as treacherous. I could see the route clearly, identify the stable footing and the places where the rock crumbled away into space. Within an hour, I reached the amphitheater where I'd seen the thing pretending to be Marcus. The space was larger than I'd realized in the dark. The walls were covered in strange symbols, not carved, but somehow burned into the rock itself. They spiraled up from the floor in dizzying patterns that hurt to look at directly. And at the center of the amphitheater was a hole. It was perfectly circular, about 8 feet across, descending into absolute darkness. The edges were worn smooth, as if countless hands had gripped them over the years. A rope ladder made of some kind of organic fiber hung from one side, disappearing into the depths. "Marcus," I called down, "are you down there?" His voice came back immediately, weak but unmistakably real. "Sarah. Oh God, Sarah, you have to get me out of here. Are you hurt? I think my leg's broken. Sarah, there are things down here. Things that look like people, but they're not. You have to hurry." I tested the rope ladder. It seemed sturdy enough, though the fibers felt strange under my hands. Too smooth, almost oily. But I could hear the desperation in Marcus's voice, the terror that the thing outside the RV had never quite managed to fake. I started climbing down. The walls of the shaft were covered in more of those burned symbols. They seemed to move in my peripheral vision, writhing and shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air grew thick and humid as I descended, carrying a smell like wet earth and something else. Something organic and wrong. 20 feet down, my flashlight beam found the bottom. Marcus was there, huddled against the far wall with one leg bent at an unnatural angle. But he wasn't alone. The shaft opened into a larger cavern, and the walls were lined with alcoves. In each alcove sat a figure. Men, women, children, all perfectly still. At first I thought they were statues, but as my light passed over them, I saw the subtle rise and fall of breathing. They were alive, but their eyes were gone, not torn out or damaged, simply absent, leaving smooth skin where eyes should be. "Don't look at them," Marcus whispered urgently. "Don't look at them directly. That's how they take your face." I dropped the last few feet and rushed to his side. Up close, I could see he was really hurt. His left leg was badly broken, and he had scratches and bruises covering his arms and face. "What happened?" I whispered, keeping my voice low. I followed the voice calling for help. It led me here, and I fell. "But Sarah, these things, they're not human. They're something else, something that feeds on identity, I think. They steal faces, voices, everything that makes someone human. We need to get you out of here. I can't climb with this leg, and even if I could..." He nodded toward the alcoves. "They're waking up." He was right. The figures in the alcoves were beginning to stir. Their smooth faces turned toward us with unerring accuracy despite their lack of eyes. And as they moved, I could see that their skin was wrong. Too pale, too smooth, like latex masks. "There's another way out," Marcus whispered. "A tunnel at the back of the cavern. But we'd have to go deeper." The thought of going further underground, further into whatever this place was, filled me with terror. But the alternative was trying to get Marcus up a 20-foot rope ladder with a broken leg while surrounded by things that wore human faces like costumes. "Can you walk at all?" "If you help me." I got him to his feet, letting him lean on me for support. The figures in the alcoves were definitely awake now, turning to follow our movement. They didn't make any sound, but I could feel their attention like a weight pressing down on us. We made our way toward the back of the cavern. The tunnel Marcus had mentioned was barely 5 feet high, forcing us to crouch as we moved deeper underground. My flashlight beam showed smooth walls covered in more of those burning symbols, and the air grew thicker with each step. "Marcus," I whispered, "how do you know about this tunnel?" I explored while I was trapped down there. I had to find a way out. Something in his voice made me stop. I turned to look at him in the flashlight beam, and for just a moment his face looked wrong. The features were Marcus's features, but arranged slightly off, like a photograph that had been adjusted and reprinted. "You're not Marcus," I breathed. The thing wearing my husband's face smiled. That same flat smile I'd seen in the amphitheater. "Very good, Sarah. But you're too late now. Much too late." I ran. The tunnel branched and twisted, and I took turns randomly, desperate to put distance between myself and the thing that had been wearing Marcus's face. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I fled, showing glimpses of more alcoves, more eyeless figures stirring to wakefulness. Behind me, I could hear laughter. Not just one voice, but dozens, all echoing through the tunnels. And, underneath it all, Marcus's real voice, screaming my name from somewhere in the darkness. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, then collapsed against a wall, gasping. The laughter had faded, but I could still hear movement in the tunnels around me. Soft footsteps, whispered conversations, the sound of many somethings moving through the dark. That's when I found the journal. It was lying on the tunnel floor, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. I opened it with trembling fingers, hoping for some explanation, some clue about what this place was and how to escape. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, written in a woman's careful handwriting. Day 1. We found the most amazing campsite in Ohei Canyon lands. Remote, beautiful, exactly what we needed after Tom's accident. The kids are excited to try camping in the RV. I flipped through pages of normal camping observations, complaints about the generator, descriptions of hikes, excitement about seeing wildlife. But gradually, the entries changed. Day 5. Something's wrong with Emma. She came back from her walk different. Won't look at us directly, and when she smiles... God, when she smiles, it doesn't reach her eyes. Day 7. That thing isn't Emma. It's wearing her face, but it moves wrong. talks wrong. Tom thinks I'm having a breakdown, but I know what I see. The real Emma is still out there somewhere. I can hear her crying at night. Day 12. Tom's gone. He followed the voice calling for help, just like the others. The thing wearing Emma's face says he'll be back soon, but I know better. I'm alone now with that thing, and it's getting better at being Emma. Sometimes I almost believe it's really her. Day 18. I found them. Underground, in a place that shouldn't exist. Rows and rows of people in alcoves, all alive, but changed. Their eyes are gone, and something else looks out from behind their faces. This is where they harvest identities, where they learn to be human. Day 23. I think I'm going crazy. The Emma thing is so convincing now. It remembers things only the real Emma would know, acts exactly like her. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the trauma of Tom's accident made me paranoid. Maybe this is my daughter, and I'm the monster for doubting her. Day 30. It's not Emma. It's never been Emma. But it's learned enough from watching me that it doesn't need to pretend anymore. It brought friends tonight. Things wearing Tom's face, my mother's face, faces of people I haven't seen in years. They're all here now, all smiling at me with those flat, dead expressions. I don't think I'm leaving this place. The journal ended there, but loose pages had been tucked into the back cover. These were written in different handwriting, dozens of different handwritings. They wear our faces better than we do. The real ones are kept alive. They need the originals to perfect the copy. Don't believe your own eyes. Don't trust your own voice when it calls to you from the dark. The symbols aren't decorations. They're instructions. Recipes for stealing souls. Day and night don't matter here. Time moves differently in the deep places. I found my husband in the lowest chamber. He's been dead for 6 months, but his copy has been living my life, sleeping in my bed, raising my children. I closed the journal with shaking hands. Now I understood what this place was. Some kind of processing center, a factory where human identities were stolen and reproduced. The things I'd encountered weren't trying to hurt me directly. They were studying me, learning to be me. A sound from the tunnel ahead made me freeze. Footsteps, accompanied by a familiar voice. Sarah? Sarah, where are you? It was my own voice calling to me from the darkness. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the tunnel wall, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps came closer, and I could hear other voices now. Marcus, my mother, my sister, even my childhood friend Jenny, who died in a car accident 15 years ago. We're all here now, Sarah, my voice said from just around the corner. Everyone you've ever loved. Don't you want to see us? The footsteps stopped just outside my hiding spot. In the absolute darkness, I could hear breathing that wasn't quite right. Too measured, too deliberate, like something that had learned the mechanics of breathing but not the instinct. We know you're there, Marcus's voice said. We can smell your fear. It's so much stronger than the others, so much more refined. You'll make excellent raw material. Such a strong identity, my mother's voice added. So many layers, so many experiences to absorb. We'll be you better than you ever were. I held my breath, pressing myself deeper into the shadows. The voices continued their horrible conversation, discussing my personality like a menu. Her relationship with Marcus has such interesting tensions. Love and frustration and hope all tangled together. And her work. All those children she saved, all that compassion. It will make a very convincing mask. Don't forget the guilt. She blames herself for her father's death, even though she was just a child. That kind of deep shame adds such authentic texture. They knew everything. Every secret, every fear, every buried memory. Whatever these things were, they could extract a person's entire identity with perfect fidelity. The voices began to fade as the footsteps moved away. But just before they disappeared completely, I heard something that made my blood freeze. She's pregnant. I wasn't. Marcus and I had been trying for 2 years without success. But somehow, these things knew something I didn't. Could they see into futures as well as pasts? Or was this just another psychological game? another way to break down my sense of reality. I waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, then began moving again. The tunnel system was vast, branching and reconnecting like a three-dimensional maze. But gradually, I began to notice a pattern in the symbols covering the walls. They weren't random. They were directional, pointing towards something deeper in the complex. Following the symbols, I descended through level after level of tunnels and chambers. Each level held more alcoves, more eyeless figures sitting in perfect stillness. But as I went deeper, the figures began to change. On the third level, they still looked mostly human. On the fourth, their features were subtly wrong. Ears slightly pointed, fingers too long, smiles too wide. By the sixth level, the pretense of humanity was wearing thin. The things in the alcoves had too many joints in their arms, too many teeth in their mouths, skin that moved like it wasn't quite attached to what was underneath. And on the seventh level, I found the source. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were covered in symbols that glowed with their own light, pulsing in hypnotic patterns. And at the center of the space was a pool of black liquid that reflected no light at all. Things moved in the pool. Shapeless, primitive forms that occasionally rose to the surface before sinking back into the depths. This was where they came from, I realized. The raw material that learned to wear human faces, to speak with human voices, to love and laugh and lie with perfect mimicry. And floating at the edge of the pool, face down and motionless, was Marcus. The real Marcus. I splashed into the pool without thinking, desperate to reach him before it was too late. The liquid was warm and thick, like blood, and it clung to my skin with an oily residue. But Marcus was breathing. Barely, but breathing. I dragged him to the edge of the pool and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were unfocused, confused. Then they fixed on my face and filled with an emotion so complex I couldn't name it. Relief, love, terror, and something else. "Sarah," he whispered, "you're real. You're actually real." "Of course I'm real. Can you walk?" I think so. But Sarah, we can't leave. Not yet." "What do you mean?" He struggled to sit up, water, or whatever the liquid was, streaming from his clothes. "They're not just copying us. They're replacing us. Out there in the world, things wearing our faces are living our lives. If we leave now, if we try to go back, what? How do we prove we're the real ones? How do we convince anyone that the people they've been living with, working with, loving, are imposters?" The horrible truth of it hit me like a physical blow. Even if we escaped, even if we made it back to civilization, who would believe us? Our friends and family had been interacting with our copies for days now. Those things had learned to be us so perfectly that they might be more convincing than we were. "There has to be a way," I said. "Some way to stop this." Marcus pointed to the symbols on the walls. "I've been studying them while they were learning from me. I think they're not just instructions. They're also constraints, rules that bind these things to this place." "What kind of rules?" "They can only take faces from people who come here willingly, people who hear the voices calling for help and choose to follow, and they can only maintain the copies as long as the original is alive and connected to this place." Hope flickered in my chest. So, if we destroy this place, the copies lose their power. They revert to what they really are. How do we destroy it? Marcus gestured toward the pool. "Fire. The whole place is some kind of organic network, all connected through that. If we could burn it..." I thought of the emergency flares I'd brought from the RV. They were designed to burn hot and bright, even in wet conditions. But using them down here would mean trapping ourselves in a burning cavern 7 levels underground. "Marcus, if we do this, we might not make it out." "I know." He took my hand, his fingers still slick with the pool's oily residue. "But if we don't, those things will keep spreading. They'll take more faces, more identities, until there's nothing human left." I looked around the chamber one more time. The symbols pulsed faster now, as if sensing our intentions. In the pool, more shapes were rising to the surface, primitive forms trying to become something recognizable. something that could walk among humans undetected. "Okay," I said. "Let's burn it all down." I pulled out the flares while Marcus gathered debris from around the chamber. Scraps of organic matter that had fallen from the walls, dried residue from the pool. We piled it all at the base of the chamber's central pillar, where the symbols glowed brightest. "Sarah," Marcus said as I prepared to ignite the first flare, "in case this doesn't work. I love you, the real you." "I love you too." I struck the flare. The flame caught immediately, spreading faster than I'd expected. The organic debris went up like kindling, and the fire climbed toward the symbol-covered walls. As soon as the flames touched the glowing marks, the entire chamber convulsed. A sound like screaming filled the air. Not from any throat, but from the chamber itself. The symbols flared brighter, then began to fade as the fire spread. In the pool, the shapeless forms thrashed violently before dissolving into the black liquid. "Run!" Marcus shouted over the noise. We fled through the tunnel system as the caverns collapsed behind us. The symbols on the walls were dying, their glow fading to nothing, and without their light the tunnels were plunging into absolute darkness. I used my last flashlight batteries to navigate, following half-remembered turns while the ceiling rained debris. Behind us, I could hear the screaming of things that were losing their borrowed humanity. The sound followed us up through level after level, growing fainter but never quite disappearing. We reached the rope ladder just as my flashlight died. Above us, I could see a circle of stars, the most beautiful sight I'd ever witnessed. Marcus's leg was still broken, but adrenaline gave him the strength to climb. I followed, pushing him up when his strength failed. We emerged into the amphitheater as dawn was breaking over the canyon walls. The symbols carved into the rock were fading, becoming just meaningless scratches. And in the distance we could hear something that sounded like wind, but might have been the collective sigh of 1,000 stolen identities returning to their owners. The walk back to the RV took 3 hours. Marcus leaned heavily on me, his face gray with pain, but we made it. The generator started on the first try, and within minutes we were driving toward the nearest town, toward hospitals and police and people who might or might not believe our story. That was 6 months ago. Marcus's leg healed, though he still walks with a slight limp. We never went back to Ohei Canyon lands, and according to the Park Service, the area we camped in has been closed indefinitely due to geological instability. Sometimes I wonder if we really destroyed that place or just damaged it. Sometimes I catch Marcus looking at me strangely, as if he's studying my face, learning my expressions. And sometimes, late at night, I hear voices calling for help from somewhere far away. But then Marcus will smile, really smile, with warmth reaching his eyes. And I know he's real. We both are. At least, I hope we are. The pregnancy test came back positive last week. We'd been trying for so long that it should have been cause for celebration. But I can't shake the memory of that voice in the tunnels, the one that claimed to know I was pregnant before I did myself. How did it know? And what else does it know about the life growing inside me? I've been having dreams lately. Dreams of a child with too many teeth, with eyes that reflect light like an animal's. Dreams of symbols burned into nursery walls, of lullabies sung in languages that shouldn't exist. Marcus says they're just anxiety dreams, normal for expectant mothers. He's probably right. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I find myself pressing my hands to my belly and whispering, "Please be human. Please be mine. Please be real." Because in a world where faces can be stolen and identities can be worn like masks, how can anyone be sure of anything anymore? How can I be sure that the thing growing inside me is human? How can I be sure that I am?